Welcome, 49er fans. I'm Jason Aponte. That's Brian Peacock. This is another episode of Peacock and Aponte. We're going to be talking minicamp reactions, the Justin Jefferson, Brandon Aiyuk thing. Did the 49ers call about Justin Jefferson? And what players need to have really big training camps in order to save their 53-man roster lives? Stick around. We'll be right back. Welcome, everybody. Let's go, Niners. My name is Jason Aponte. I'm Jason Aponte. That's Brian Peacock. This is another episode of Peacock and Aponte. A lot of things to talk about, Brian. It's good to see you, though, man. How's the vibes?
Vibes are great, man. It's a little heat wave over here in California. So I'm kind of cooking right now where I live in the Bay Area. Usually it's about 65 degrees every day. It gets a little warm. You roll down a window and that's plenty. Not plenty today. So if I start sweating a little bit during this podcast, it's not just because of the scintillating conversations, because it's damn hot over here.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because it's around the same degrees that it is here. And we're like, oh, it's really nice. Just open a window. And it's just the polar opposites of the East and the West Coast and what is determined as hot. Like, that's the funny part to me.
Dude, we are in a great spot because a lot of California is 108 degrees right now. So my 80 something degrees feels like complaining, but we don't even equip our homes with air conditioners in San Francisco, right? Like it's not even a thing that you need. A couple days per year gets really hot. Just happens this is one of those days.
Well, so glad that it is one of these days. I guess it's, again, because of mandatory minicamp coming in hot. I guess that's the best way that we can start there. And all of the hype around players playing in shorts and everything as well, too. I guess we've heard some really good things about Brock Purdy again. And I think a lot of it has to do with a lot of people being impressed with the fact that he seems to be the guy running the practices and he has this aura about him, which I think is excellent news. But I'm going to start at my favorite position, but it sounds like Ricky Pearsall and Brock Purdy have a connection. Man, that is very good to hear, even though we won't know what it's going to look like until the pads go on.
It's fantastic to hear. It's really important for young wide receivers to be able to hit the ground running in the NFL, to develop early in their career, because it does take some time at that position. And, one of the things I've started to notice with Brock Purdy throughout his 49ers career is he has a pretty good rapport with everybody. And I think that's even the best sign of all of it, is that Brock Purdy is good at putting the ball in his receiver's hands. No matter if you're a big receiver, a small receiver, a fast receiver, a tight end, a running back, a wide receiver, outside in the slot, he can find you. And Ricky Pearsall really seems like someone who has a high floor. And I don't know what his ceiling is going to be for the 49ers, but it would be a shock at this point if Ricky Pearsall is like some kind of a bust of a player. Now, does he live up to being a quote-unquote first-round wide receiver? Is he one of the best wide receivers in the NFL? I don't know what that's going to look like, but man, if he fails because of anything other than injury, I'd be pretty shocked at this point.
And that's a really nice place to be, especially with a first-round pick, because I think we've talked about it. It's less than 50% of first-round picks pan out, then obviously that number gets chopped down second and third and fourth round. And wide receivers have a very high bust rate. And that's the part that I think is really important, from knowing that you kind of feel safe right now, even though that there are no snaps being taken, obviously, with pads on. But I have the same sentiment. And for some reason, I feel the same way about Jacob Cowing as well, too. And that's a good feeling to have, especially with the way the 49ers have drafted outside of Brandon Aiyuk, who did not report today and still does not have a contract. But there have been some misses in the Shanahan era, right? Dante Pettis comes to mind. Maybe someone else might be that we'll be talking about a little bit later in terms of players that are on the clock this offseason.
Is Brandon Aiyuk the only guy that's gone in and come back out of the doghouse? Is the question.
Yes.
He's the only one.
Yeah. Dante Pettis went into the doghouse. A cat came out a kitten. Danny Gray, I don't even know if he's in the doghouse. He just doesn't get onto the field, right?
He's so fast that he ran past the doghouse and didn't realize he was even supposed to be in it. Cam Latu, just day one just wandered into the doghouse and be like, wait a second, is Cam Latu in the doghouse? He's not done anything yet to even get in the doghouse. He just started there.
Hey, I have a question about the doghouse, and it's about Jordan Mason. Is Jordan Mason in the doghouse because of the pass pro that he missed in Cleveland? And Kyle just said, "That's it," right? Like that's it. I remember that vividly. Like it ended up like breaking a play up, and I everyone's asking about where's Jordan Mason, and you heard Kyle Shanahan say we need to lighten the load on Christian McCaffrey, and I want to give you credit because our last episode when you were talking about paying Christian McCaffrey and a potential deal that he could be moving into more of a wide receiver, wide back role. I think that's kind of what Kyle was alluding to. But then everybody believes that it's Jordan Mason that steps up. Am I the only one that feels like he's in the doghouse a little bit himself and he hasn't necessarily played poorly?
No, I don't think it's that case with Jordan Mason. I think it's just that nobody else gets carries. So if there's only, two carries left over in a game that aren't Christian McCaffrey's, and there's still another running back ahead of you in Elijah Mitchell, then you're probably not going to see much usage unless Elijah Mitchell's hurt, and then you're the number two, and then you still only get 2 carries in that case, right? And that's kind of what Kyle Shanahan was talking about. He's got to figure out how to give the ball to somebody else. Like from the eye test and from just a pure runner standpoint, it would seem that Jordan Mason is a clear player that deserves to touch the rock, but Elijah Mitchell is as well. And Elijah Mitchell's ahead of Jordan Mason still on the depth chart. Now, there might be the quickest way to not be on the football field in the NFL as a running back is be bad in pass pro. And Jordan Mason was like the up back on punt coverage. Jordan Mason, I don't think is a guy is bad in pass protection. His, the style of play his body type, like he should be a really good pass protector, so can they not trust him scheme wise, which might've been some of the problems with Brandon Aiyuk, I think early on. It wasn't a problem of Brandon Aiyuk not being athletic enough, being able to get open or whatever early in his career. I think it was some of the details, maybe he wasn't blocking hard enough. Maybe he wasn't where he needed to be. Maybe he was not running routes 1 foot outside of the hash where he's supposed to be running this route, because it's not about you getting open. It's about how you're running this route for the entire play that's called by Kyle Shanahan. So I just think some details. Kyle Shanahan is obviously a detail-oriented guy, and he needs to be able to trust that his players are going to run things the exact way that he needs them to be run. So that could be one of the aspects of it. I just don't think there's a lot of opportunity for Jordan Mason. So that's the biggest problem. And I think if he got more opportunity, I think he'd see the ball more. I think Kyle Shanahan would trust him, and you'd be off and running. But at this point, with Christian McCaffrey, how much he touches the ball, there's just not enough footballs to go around. But there could be, if Christian McCaffrey becomes the wide back of the future, like he should be in this offense. But I will say, Kyle Shanahan saying he needs to limit Christian McCaffrey's touches in June is much different than him limiting Christian McCaffrey's touches in week 1, fourth quarter. You're up 2 touchdowns. I don't quite feel comfortable yet. All right, Christian, we're still going to pound the rock with you.
100%. Like saying something right now, and then when you're starting to see the flow of the game and you're like, I've got to get this one done. Trust is Kyle's biggest thing. It's meet the Fockers, right? When you're in the trust circle, you're in, but he's watching you. I wanted to ask you something. I thought that a lot of the info that I got from minicamp today was done in the press conferences. And today, Fred Warner is in the best shape of his life. Take a drink. That's what he said. But he did say the star of the minicamp was D Winters. Now, that's very interesting. Now, obviously, players hype up players all the time. But wouldn't that be such a feather in the 49ers cap if D Winters eventually does something, especially considering we don't know the timeline of Dre Greenlaw. Devondre Campbell's here and he's a veteran, but we've seen the thing that he's known for is mostly pass coverage. We've seen that kind of fall off a little, which he's attributed to scheme and not being put in the right spot. But man, if D Winters turns out to be someone who is a contributor, especially when you look at the draft slot, which is right the sweet spot, I believe like 5th round, something like that. It's like right there.
Winters was a 6th rounder. It was Luter and Beal were the 5th rounders in that class.
And Darrell Luter apparently is getting rave reviews as well too. I always knew they kind of wanted to see a lot from him. I think they believed that they wanted him to be out there as well too in the outside corner. But hey, Brian, D Winters, come on down. You're the next camp hero.
He's got the the measurables. He's a run and hit player. It was really easy to watch tape and be like, well, this guy can go get him for sure. I think he needs to be part of pass coverage in the NFL is not just athleticism. It's understanding the concepts that you're seeing, being in the right place at the right time, understanding where you need to be in the zones, what your responsibilities are. And I think that's really hard for a college linebacker where they're not throwing the ball and putting college linebackers under stress in the passing game like they do in the NFL. So I think that's probably a huge learning curve for young linebackers, more so than it ever was in the past. But he's fast and he's athletic and he profiles very similar to Dre Greenlaw. Was not drafted far off from where Dre Greenlaw was drafted into the NFL. So if the 49ers can find a guy who could play a role at weak side linebacker, which is the perfect spot for D Winters, I mean, you might be onto something. Yeah. And it seemed like as the year, because remember last offseason and last training camp, it was Jalen Graham that kind of got all the accolades and had all the hype coming into the season. Then he kind of disappeared. And then D Winters showed up at the end of the year. And I wonder if D Winters could be that guy, that breakout second-year player for the 49ers. And there's so many guys that have done that. And the biggest jump that happens in the NFL is between year one and year two for a lot of players. And so I'm really eyeballing that 2022 draft class because they played the fewest snaps of any draft class in the NFL for the 49ers. Sorry, the 2023 draft class. Mm-hmm. So last year's rookie 49ers played fewer snaps than any rookie class in the NFL last year. But some learning experiences and guys like Luter, Beal, D Winters, they're, obviously Jair Brown, has a prime opportunity
into the finals
to be a starter. Yeah. Very different body types there. And so this could actually be a pretty good class, even though they didn't contribute much as rookies. We just don't know a lot about them right now.
And it's funny, the dynamic of that draft class has them not really contributing. And then this entire draft class is all guys who have had extensive snaps and have been fifth-year players and almost are ready to go. It's funny how it was almost wait and see on a few guys last year. And now it's like, well, we expect a lot of these guys to play this year. And you could have a flux of both. Like you could have some contributors from last season. You could have some guys right away. We're going to find out pretty quickly with this. But I wanted to turn this one to the secondary a little bit because Talanoa Hufanga actually spoke. And he talked about his timetable and saying he's not targeting training camp. He wants to be ready for week one. That didn't worry me at all, in my opinion. I think he has a good handle on it. He spoke glowingly about Nick Sorensen and his energy. He said it was D'Amico-like. And I think that's something that's really cool. But I wanted to ask you this because Nick Sorensen spoke, and he talked about Brandon Staley taking over his job with the meeting that leads to turnover. Something, I forget what the term was, right? Like Nick Sorensen ran it last season and the 49ers were able to turn the football over and over. And now Brandon Staley's going to take that over. This whole dynamic between Nick Sorensen and Brandon Staley has just led to speculation because I don't think either of them have really nailed down the right answer or something definitive in terms of, hey, he's going to game plan. I'm going to play call. That's what I think we all thought it was going to be. But this seems fluid, and if it seems like they're just going to play this by ear with the two of them as they go into the season. What's your thoughts?
That's one storyline that I've not understood a lot is really people putting a lot of emphasis on what Brandon Staley's title is, and then Nick Sorensen's had like one time at the podium in his career, and people are like, "Oh, I don't know if he sounded like a," and it's like, well, he's a football coach. You want some like soliloquy? Do you remember the first time that Mike McDaniel was on the microphone? And that was kind of a first glimpse into who he was, and I think the 49ers knew his personality, but most of us didn't. We're like, who is this guy? He's kind of stuttering around, making weird, awkward jokes. We're like, I don't know if this guy's got what it takes, and he's one of the most brilliant coaches in the NFL. So as long as they know what their jobs are and they're making the players better, then I don't care what their title is. I don't care what they say on the microphone at the podium. Clearly, Brandon Staley's had a lot more experience talking at the podium than Nick Sorensen has. And I think they just call it the ball, the drill. About the ball. I think they just call it the ball. And it's all about getting the ball back. And it's pretty important. And just my take on it and what I've learned from the coaching staff and everybody's, I know Brandon Staley's a former head coach now in the NFL, but I think people are like overrating that because when you come into a new organization, you're going to fall in line and do what you need to do. Anthony Lynn came in and he was a former head coach and it was like, you're a running back coach. And, you know, you have the assistant head coach label, but he was a running backs coach, and he got to decide. He got to make a draft pick, and it was Ty Davis Price. And then they're like, all right, you don't get to make any more draft picks, Anthony Lynn. But, you know, it was like, it's not like he came in and took over the team and all of a sudden Kyle's like, oh, now it's Anthony Lynn's offense. No, that's not the way it goes. So just because you've been a big dog somewhere else doesn't mean you're a big dog now. You walk into the building, you're going to fall in line, and you're going to play your role. And hopefully Brandon Staley, who's a smart coach, I think, and maybe he was over his skis a little bit as a head coach, is a nice addition. And he's going to help out a lot of aspects of the defense. But Nick Sorensen's the defense coordinator. And just because he couldn't really answer the question of why did you get hired, to be honest with you, I liked his answer. He's like, ask the guy who hired me. You know, what does your wife love about you? I don't know. Ask my wife, because I don't see it, to be honest with you. And so that's kind of, you know, I had no problem with what his answers were. And people are expecting a lot, and something really profound out of his mouth the first time he speaks as defensive coordinator. Dude, get the guys in the right spot on defense. That's your job, and that's what I care about.
I'm so glad that you brought up Anthony Lynn, because I think the stink of the time of Brandon Staley's end with the Chargers is, oh, you can't bring this guy in here. Get him out of here. And I was like, well, wait a minute. Anthony Lynn literally coached the Chargers right before him, and then nobody was worried then when he was assistant head coach. It's mind-boggling to think that people are just like, well, Brandon Staley is going to be the downfall. Dude, he's not going to have to do any of the head coaching things. He's going to be there to alleviate some of that for Kyle. And also, think about this. If he focuses solely on the defense, how much that can help, because he did run a good defense with the Los Angeles Rams. And like you said, over your skis, like when people are like, well, why is his defense so bad? Well, one, his guys are constantly injured. Like Joey Bosa doesn't play. Derwin James is injured. J.C. Jackson didn't work out. And also, you have to have your hands on everything. You can't just sit in the defensive room as the head coach. You've got to move around. So I always was never worried about this move, because whatever happened as a head coach happened as a head coach. Some people aren't built to do it. But where was all this outrage when Anthony Lynn, who left a Chargers team in a similar state, was like, oh, we can't have this guy be an assistant head coach? It's like, guys, he's a part of the coaching staff. Like, it's not that big of a deal. And it could be the right role for him as opposed to being a head coach. And I just think that a lot of people are asking questions about what, like, do they have to have official titles, Brian? Like, does it have to be game plan only, play caller only, and I'm going to get out the way? I think it's a mixture of all of it, right? Like, it's going to be a mixture of both of them being secondary guys and trying to figure out how to utilize those secondary guys. And we're talking about this star role now in this defense, which I believe the last time the 49ers had it was with Jimmy Ward. But this whole idea that it's like you have to put a label on everything, as long as they're working in tandem and they're doing it, could change week to week when you start to see things happening. So that's another thing.
That's a big thing. It's game plan specific too. So I'm not super worried about the titles. Just have guys in the right spots. Make sure guys know their assignments. The run fits are good. Getting off the field on third down, right? That's the important thing. So we really can't grade what this defensive coaching staff is until, you know, very deep into the season, and we might have a better idea of it. And it's all speculation, and we're in the speculation point of the off season too. So I understand why questions come about, because we don't know and you want to have an answer and you're looking for clues. But I think if you're looking for clues from the coach at the podium about the defense right now, you're probably looking in the wrong place.
100%. Guys, almost 20 minutes in here, 170 people in here. Make sure you like this video, subscribe to both channels. We're dual streaming. You know where to find Brian, Locked On, Peacock and Williamson, all of those shows. Make sure you guys are tapped in with all of that as well, too. Here's something that's interesting. I woke up a little late this morning. Not really proud of it, but it just happened today. Just, you know,
sometimes you need the extra shut eye. It's important. One of the things I've learned is you got to get those 8. You got to get the solid 8 hours. You need your body to recuperate, especially when you're on such a high performance workout program that Jason Aponte's on. He needs he needs the protein intake. Those are important aspects to his life. So let the man sleep.
I'm literally working on my arms, just throwing my arms up because I've been watching the New York Yankees. Had to get it in there. But it's about this. Adam Schefter goes on a podcast and talks about several teams have reached out about Justin Jefferson. And you find out that the San Francisco 49ers inquired about Justin Jefferson. Now, I wake up with the initial reaction of, I just feel like I'm going to be cursed that my favorite football team is never going to have my favorite football player on it. Justin Jefferson is my favorite football player currently. My former favorite football player, I don't know why I tried to put three F's together there, was Julio Jones. And he was there for the taking the entire time. Even if it was just a limited role, I'm just like, why are you not doing this?
Yeah.
The last time.
Sorry to interrupt you, but the Kyle Julio Jones connection, it was like, did you not love breaking the entire NFL when this guy was your wide receiver and he's free and he's available and the 49ers weren't interested? That was surprising. I thought it was a done deal, Julio coming to the 49ers, supplementing that passing game. And I don't know, maybe they don't like each other that much. Who knows?
I mean, you just don't replace Chris Conley or Willie Snead, though, Brian, right? Like you just can't replace.
Well, according to Willie Snead, it's rigged anyway, and it's all entitlement in the 49ers.
But the last time my favorite football player played for the San Francisco 49ers was Terrell Owens. And then before that, I was lucky enough, it was Jerry Rice. Since then, I love a lot of 49ers, but my favorite football player is not on the 49ers, and it hasn't been for a while. But what do you make of the 49ers even asking? Now, when we talk about, hey, they put out some feelers about Brandon Aiyuk and Deebo Samuel, I think, what's the word? And we're going to use this one as like a take a shot, due diligence. You have to find out what's out there. That's always the word. But what do you make of the 49ers reaching out about Justin Jefferson? And what do you think that means for Brandon Aiyuk and Deebo Samuel?
Well, I have
would have meant.
Right. I have a theory on what I think it for sure means. But there's also that little bit that's a little bit more more exciting and more look. So the 49ers are competitive. And when Christian McCaffrey is available, they were in on it. When Trent Williams was available, they were in on it. They've been in on a lot of things. Sometimes they bring guys in, sometimes they don't. I think it's really cool for someone who covers the team, for a fan of the 49ers, to know that your head coach, your GM, and your owner is allowing these things to happen where when a great player is available, they're trying to add them to your football team. I think that's a pretty cool thing. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is, okay, let's say that this report was 100% the 49ers were calling because they wanted a trade for Justin Jefferson from the Vikings. Okay, so this is before the draft. They've had conversations with Brandon Aiyuk and his agent, and he's asking for $30 million. So they're like, well, that's Justin Jefferson money. Well, let's just go trade for Justin Jefferson. If we're going to pay top of the market money, let's actually get the best wide receiver in the NFL. So I could buy it if that was what was happening there. A little disrespectful to Brandon Aiyuk because he's the guy you already have. You know he works in your offense, and you're trying to presumably trade him because he would have to be part of the deal. I would assume he's on his way to Minnesota, and the 49ers would add pick 31 to that. I don't even know what that offer would look like, right? Even if the Vikings, obviously the report was they squashed everything and there were actually no conversations. They're like, yeah, no, we're not trading him. But if they said, okay, we'd think about it for the right deal, what would that offer even be? Aiyuk in number 31? Is that what it would take? Would that be enough? Would they need more? You would ask for a ton for Justin Jefferson if you're the Minnesota Vikings. But Jason, this is what I think actually did happen. And this is why if Brandon Aiyuk was upset about it or the agent was upset about it and was like, hey guys, what the heck is this report? This is what the answer would be. They would be saying, well, guess what? We can't call Justin Jefferson's agent. So what are we going to do? We're going to call the Vikings to figure out more about the wide receiver market so we can sign our guy and be like, oh, hey, Kwesi, what it would be like if we traded up from pick 31. You guys interested in moving down? Yeah, maybe. Okay. What about Justin Jefferson? How are those talks going? Would you be interested in maybe moving off of him? Could we do something there? Like, oh, no, that we couldn't do that. Oh, okay. Well, how far apart are you? What's he asking for? Right. Trying to just get a little bit more insight on the market and doing your job as a GM. That's what I think happened. And if these reports are accurate, where did the reports come from? What is the source on this? Who is being helped by this being leaked right now? You could probably try to figure out, if the report has accuracy or not. But if the 49ers were calling the Vikings, I bet it was a fact-finding mission and not like they thought they were going to go trade for Justin Jefferson.
Yeah, and I think that's a brilliant way of looking at it, because you have to remember, if you're trading for Justin Jefferson in whatever capacity, whatever it is, whether it's Aiyuk, Debo in a pick, whatever, Aiyuk in a pick, whatever, you have to give him the most money that a non-quarterback has ever gotten. And it didn't take an inside source from anyone to know that Justin Jefferson was about to be paid more guaranteed money, whatever, than anyone who has ever played the game, right? And that's how this always works. That's interesting because if it becomes, well, we've got to move off Aiyuk and Debo, well, let's just place them with the best receiver in the league, and then you have to give him all of that money. It's like you said, it's a value thing. Do you give Brandon Aiyuk 30 annual what is it? AAV, right? Like that type
Yeah.
of thing, because Justin Jefferson got 100 million guaranteed, right? But we're not talking about AAV. Do we put our money in that, or do we spend that money and then a little bit more for the best guy in the league? And it comes down to a value thing. Yeah, I think if Brandon Aiyuk hears that, it's, man, I don't think they want to give me anything close to that. And let's be clear, I don't think that Brandon Aiyuk wants $100 million guaranteed. I'll be even more frank. I don't believe he deserves that amount of money right up front guaranteed.
Yeah,
But
they wouldn't even. I don't think they would have the gall to ask for that. I don't think they expect that.
100%, 100%. Like, again, the Amon-Ra St. Brown, Devonta Smith, that always felt like the sweet spot, especially when Jalen Waddle signs. Like, that always felt like now, especially if you're Brandon Aiyuk, because his numbers are strikingly similar to Jalen Waddle. And I would say that they probably feature him a little bit more with their high-flying, offense. He's a little bit faster, that type of thing. But the whole idea of, man, we don't know what's going to happen with Aiyuk and Debo. Let's just try and see what they're saying. I do think it's part fact finding, but you never know what a team's going to say unless you ask, right? Like, you have to put the feeler out there. I just found it interesting because it seems like there's a little bit of a staring contest going on right now between Aiyuk and the 49ers. But if you trade for Justin Jefferson, you got to give him everything. And I think that's pretty interesting. And I think they were ready to do that.
That would be part of the trade. Is you're calling and really that's, I guess, what it would be is you call the Vikings and ask for permission to talk, because Justin Jefferson, same draft class as Brandon Aiyuk, under his 5th year contract. You can't call Justin Jefferson's agent. You call you call the Vikings and ask for permission to speak to Justin Jefferson's agent. And so that's what the process probably would have been. And I think fact finding is the most likely aspect of it. But if you're going to only have one wide receiver because Debo's going to be gone after this year, then why not spend $5 million more per year to get the best wide receiver in the NFL? And maybe it was as simple as that. I find it hard to believe though that Kyle Shanahan's like, oh yeah, I want a guy who costs the most and I have to target him 160 times.
Oh yeah, you do.
I don't think that's the way Kyle Shanahan wants to run his offense. That's how he has it in San Francisco. He did when he did have Julio. That's kind of how it went a little bit, but was that more necessity?
Yeah, 100%. So again, I've just resigned myself to the fact that my favorite football player is never going to be a 49er. And hearing that was a little bit more like a twisting of the knife. But I think, again, we're talking about Brandon Aiyuk, and I think this is where the conversation changes to Christian McCaffrey. And we're talking about like how much money is allocated. We all know that Eric Armstead's money was about to come off the books, and it just did. And then Christian McCaffrey signs, but Christian McCaffrey signing and the way that contract is structured has actually opened up more cap space for the 49ers. And I don't think that's something that I don't think that they just woke up that day and said, what would be great if we just gave Christian McCaffrey a different contract. Like, that had to be in the works. That had to be something that they were talking about and thinking about. So the Justin Jefferson thing in line with that opens up a little bit more money. And then sure enough, Justin Jefferson signed like not that long ago from Christian McCaffrey. I'm just trying to put the pieces together in this thought process of like, was this more like fact finding, or did they have a possible pathway to this with Eric Armstead's money coming out, what they knew they were going to do with Christian McCaffrey and how much the cap was going to go up, and even signing Justin Jefferson this season wouldn't have been necessarily the cap hit right away. So it still puts them in a spot where you've opened up cap space, possibly can roll some over for the Brock Purdy contract. All of this stuff just raises so many questions if it is true.
I think you hit on what the 49ers are doing, and it's something they've been doing for a while, and I don't think enough people talk about it. And you mentioned rolling over cap space. Do you remember last offseason? It was a little closer to the beginning of the season where the 49ers made some moves and cleared up a bunch, did some restructures and cleared up a bunch of cap space. And everyone's like, oh man, what's the big, something's going to happen. Something's about to happen. The big move happening. No, they're rolling over cash and they're going to do it again this year. And I think that's what the space that they have now is for. I don't think any of the extra space is needed for Brandon Aiyuk. In fact, Brandon Aiyuk might be the same story where he creates even more cap space than the 49ers currently have. And I think they're going to roll it all over because they got to pay Bosa. They got to pay Warner. They got to pay Kittle. They got to pay, Brock Purdy next year. And Brock Purdy's not one that makes a bunch of money where you're going to pay him less. When you do a new contract with him, the cost is going to go up because he's only making $1 million, right? And he's not making $14 million like Chris McCaffrey and Brandon Aiyuk are. So you can't create cap space when you do the Brock Purdy deal. So I think all the cap space the 49ers are creating right now is about rolling it over and being able to pay everybody because all those contracts are going up. Bosa's contract starts to go up a lot next year. Kittle and Warner are in the big years of their contracts next year. So those are expensive. Debo as well goes way up, which is why he's probably not going to be around if they do sign Brandon Aiyuk. And another thing they're starting to do, which they hadn't done before, because remember you going back to like the Jimmy G days, and they were kind of front loading contracts. They were paying a lot of cash right away and keeping their cap situation good as it went. And they just don't have that opportunity to do anymore because they've got too many big deals. So they're starting to throw void years. They're putting void years on. They're putting like dead money on the cap in 2027 and 2028 to re-up Colton McKivitz and to sign Yetur Gross-Matos, So they're, and, obviously with Christian McCaffrey and Bosa and these deals, they're putting void years on there. So the 49ers are trying to do what they can to have a good cap to pay a bunch of guys a lot of money. And they're starting to put a little bit on that credit card. And you really hope the cap keeps going up to allow you to keep keeping all of these star players into 2027, 2028. The roster might start looking a lot different, though, very soon. And I think one of the players that I was worried would really change things would be Christian McCaffrey not being around. Injury could still happen with him. He's led the league in touches for 2 years and a lot of tread on his tires for only being 28 years old. I doubt he's on the team in 2027, the last year of his deal, but I think there's a good chance he is here for the first 3 years of that new contract, or basically one of the 2 added years. I think there's a good chance he's here for that. And I think it's the contract actually makes it less likely that he's going to be around in 2027, the way it's structured. And Kittle in his 30s, Trent Williams won't be around in 2027. So it's going to start looking a lot different. And then you start looking at what this team's going to look like. Well, you better be right and better have your quarterback. And so that's Brock Purdy. You got to pay him a lot. And who would you rather have then? It's got to revolve around somebody in the passing game. And it's got to be Brandon Aiyuk because he's the guy that's the best receiver. He's the right age. His body is not worn down as much as Debo Samuel. So there's a lot of pass that this thing could take. And I think if Aiyuk sees himself differently than the 49ers, so much so that they can't get a deal done, then maybe things take a turn. And maybe that was what the Justin Jefferson thing was about. But I got to imagine that the path forward is, 2026, Brandon Aiyuk's the number one gun, and it's Brock Purdy, Brandon Aiyuk. And if that's not good enough to carry the offense, the 49ers might be in trouble long-term.
Yeah, and the wide receiver room, it looks like it was taking shape because I still believe that they get this done with Brandon Aiyuk. I don't see them moving Brandon Aiyuk before the season for future picks. I think if they were going to do that, that would have happened in the draft. Juwan Jennings is going to be here for 2 years. That's locked in. Like they clearly want him here for 2 years. That's why they signed that deal. Mooney Ward becomes affected by this now just a little bit. And let's talk about it. If we want to panic about something, which is I'm obviously joking, Ricky Pearsall still hasn't signed yet. And that's something that this year is nothing. And then it'll just eventually it'll start turning in because it is a first round guy. Now, yes, you have the 5th-year option, which is what Brandon Aiyuk is playing on. It's the multiple paths of the way this Brandon Aiyuk thing can play out. And I'm going to throw a few to you real quick. He plays on the 5th-year option, and then the 49ers tag him. Or he plays on the 5th-year option, the 49ers don't tag him, and they allow teams to bid. I, for one, don't think that he's going to play on a fifth-year option. Not that he has a choice, but I think that's not the preferred method. What do you think?
I think that's the distant third, and I think if he plays on the fifth-year option, that's the one of the cues that Brandon Aiyuk's probably going to be gone, and then it'll be a tag and trade situation, and that will mean that things went to a place where there's probably some animosity on both sides potentially, and that also means that Brandon Aiyuk probably misses a lot of training camp, and we saw what that did with Bosa. And I think for an offensive player in the passing game, it's even more important to have a ramp-up period and be be ingrained in the offense and everyone on the same page. And Brock Purdy is such a timing thrower as it is. I think that would hurt the 49ers offense to start the year if Brandon Aiyuk holds out. And if he holds out that long, that might even be a holdout into the season where he doesn't even show up until a couple weeks into the year. And then that potentially he could hold out all the way until whenever you have to show up to accrue a season, like week 8. Like that could be, the most disastrous is he waits until week 8 to show up, plays out his fifth-year option. Niners throw the franchise tag on him. He's unhappy about it. Tag and trade situation next offseason. Like that's the worst case scenario, but it's a distant third option to what I think is more likely. And the number one is the thing that I've been talking about for over a year at Locked On 49ers. It's like, okay, you re-sign Brandon Aiyuk and Deebo Samuel gets traded after 2024. I think that's the plan. That's what they plan on. But you can have a plan that goes awry. And so maybe things change that. But I still think that is the much, much more likely plan for the 49ers.
100%. I think they still get this done. Again, the money's there, right? And an extension would actually clear more cap space. We talked about that as well, too, because he's already playing on his 5th year. The way they've been staggering these contracts, I think, again, the 49ers have afforded themselves this luxury of winning over and over, and that's very profitable. So we have to make sure that we take that into account. They're not just going to let this team go completely, awry or anything like that. Obviously, things change.
Sorry to interrupt you again, but
yeah,
the salary cap's in a place where a team like the 49ers or a big market team, they're not going to be hurting because of salary for their players ever, because the salary cap's in a place where the small market teams are having a tough time maybe getting to the top of it. The 49ers are not, and they are very profitable, and they're one of the most valuable organizations in pro sports, and they just have to figure out how to fit everybody in. That's the puzzle piece for the 49ers.
And I think they've done a good job of that. And there's been a lot of discussion about, like, what is this team doing? How are they? Well, look what they've built. Look how they're paying everyone. Look how they're maneuvering the cap. And they're not just paying anyone. They're paying the best at their position at times, right? And I think when we look at draft class and we're like, oh, they missed on this, they missed on that. Well, everybody misses on draft pieces and everything. But this team is doing something that 29, 30 other teams would love to do every single year, which is have a loaded roster, have a deep run. And they've been having deep runs with Jimmy Garoppolo at quarterback, now Brock Purdy. It's so funny to me that, like, we get caught up in, oh, well, this guy's a bust pick. This guy's a bust pick. Think about another organization that will be able to survive sending the assets to acquire Trey Lance with the 3rd pick, have that completely go awry, and have no sort of setback in terms of winning, have no sort of setback in terms of deep playoff runs. We just got to start giving them a little bit of credit at this point and a little bit of leeway, because we all believe, oh, well, this player's a bust and you're not going to be able to play this person and all that stuff. Sure, tough decisions are absolutely going to be made. They have to be made. And you saw it with Eric Armstead already, right? But, man, you know how many other teams would love to have these sort of problems and be able to maneuver it the way that the 49ers have while sustaining winning?
Oh, we have too many stars to pay. What are we going to do? It's when the 49ers start trading guys away, too, is one of my things. And they haven't really done much of that. The DeForest Buckner move was the big one, and that was like it was a pretty shrewd move at the time. Replacing him with another player at his position that didn't work out was kind of a bust of a move for the 49ers.
Mm-hmm.
But I understand the shrewdness of the move, and I think we might see that more happening with this team. I mentioned about how the 49ers are not going to go poor paying all these guys. One thing they do have to have a lot of, and I think we're seeing this with the Dallas Cowboys right now, is it does take a whole lot of cash And like Jerry Jones and the Cowboys have a lot of cash, and they didn't do anything this offseason. And you know why? Because they got to pay guaranteed money to CeeDee Lamb, huge contract. Then they got to pay huge money, even bigger, to Dak Prescott. Then they got to pay huge money to Micah Parsons, who's probably going to go over the top of Nick Bosa and Justin Jefferson as the highest paid non-quarterback in the NFL. And when you pay these contracts, you have to put money in escrow because there's guarantees. And so it's pretty insane amount of cash you have to have on hand to do all of these things at once. And the 49ers are in an interesting spot where it's like, you could afford to pay the paychecks, but it's like, how much is Jed sitting on where he's like, oh yeah, okay, so we have this money in escrow for Nick Bosa last year, biggest non-quarterback contract at the time. Then we're going to pay Aiyuk, and then we're going to do $50 million for Purdy next year. That is a lot of just straight up cash money. So, and I've heard, I think it was Kawakami brought up like maybe Jed's just saving a couple $100,000 by waiting until August to sign Brandon Aiyuk because they don't have to put the money in escrow yet. And I don't know that that's necessarily why this is taking longer, but it is a consideration, even though these, having the cash on hand is very different than being valuable and having a lot of money and being able to pay the paychecks for these players. So that might be a little bit of a hurdle as some of these contracts get bigger and bigger in the NFL.
And we all know the salary cap is going to increase, but I don't think anybody realized that it was going to increase to the degree. And it still went up further than people forecasted. Yeah. And yet the 49ers still are finding ways to maneuver. And so they've got more money this year than they initially thought. So they had a plan, and now they're looking and say, oh, here's a little bit more money. I think, again, with another booming year, who knows what's going to happen? Obviously, with TV deals, all that stuff. Like, you don't count on the salary cap. I think you have a number where you believe it's going to be. If it's more, great. If it's less, then we've got to deal with it. But I think there's a sweet spot where they know. And I wanted to talk to you about the DeForest Buckner thing, because when you're going to get a pick that high for a defensive tackle, I think you do it 10 out of 10 times, right? But
it depends. We've seen those moves happen, and it didn't work out for the 49ers.
That's where I was right. So that's kind of where I was going.
But like in a vacuum, that's not a bad deal because the team had to pay you a mid first round pick. That's a pretty high pick at 13 and pay the guy. Like that's a lot to spend on one player.
So that's what I was getting at, right? Is yes, DeForest Buckner is brilliant, but you're getting the 13 pick for him. Now, if you stay at 13 and you take Tristan Wirfs instead of getting back and then taking Javon Kinlaw at 14, now you completely flip that trade, and that looks amazing. Now, on the flip side, and obviously this didn't work out for them, the Tennessee Titans moved on from A.J. Brown and replaced him immediately in the draft with Treylon Burks. I don't know if you guys have been looking around at the Tennessee Titans, but Treylon Burks is now being relegated to being a special teamers, right? So, like, you trade DeForest Buckner, then you take a defensive tackle to replace him immediately. You trade A.J. Brown, and then you take a wide receiver who's similarly built like him right away. And I think everybody wants picks. Everybody wants to do, but you have to do right by those picks. And that's the part that is scary about what people are talking about when it comes to these trades.
Justin Jefferson worked out, though. That was the Stephon Diggs move. They replaced him with the same player, same position, and that one worked out. Yeah. So basically, the rule is just pick a good player. Like, this is what I talked about with the Trey Lance stuff when the Niners traded all those picks up to get Trey Lance. It's like that. This is a risky move, and some people pushed back on it at the time. I was like, man, you got to grade this on a curve. You got to grade it as the Niners traded 3 picks for Trey Lance. They didn't just draft Trey Lance at number 12 and he was in their lap, right? And then you got to consider that the guy that was tied with Trey Lance, that was the 1B, was Mac Jones, and he was still available at pick 12. And neither one of them should have been the pick. Now that we know now, but even in the time without hindsight, it was like, okay, you got to consider this. The only rule is it has to work, or these guys are looking for new jobs, and it didn't work. And guess what? They got new contracts. So that's how good of a job they've done the rest of the way, and how good of a coaching staff Kyle Shanahan has put together. And I think the draft and the coaches kind of get married. And so I think it's hard because we always want to separate them. It's like, this was a bust of a pick. It was the pick that was bad. Like, I think, the 49ers have had misses as well in the draft, but I would much rather, if I was a prospect, be drafted by the 49ers. I'd have a much higher chance of success there than if I went to the Carolina Panthers or went to the Jaguars or went to whatever other team. So I think that's part of why they're able to do what they do, because eventually if they find the right player who's wired the right way, he's going to be good in this system. They're going to have to find a way for him to work. And so I think that's part of their draft hits have been that the coaching staff is good enough to figure it out with guys, and some guys just aren't going to work out no matter what. And some guy, like I think Trey Lance, they probably cut ties with too soon. I still have hopes for Trey Lance in Dallas. I don't even remember where I was going with this, but the idea of flipping a pick or flipping a player, a veteran player for a pick, just better be right about the pick. And if you hit the pick, it's way more valuable because now you got a good player on a rookie contract. But if you don't hit, then you look like an ass because now you got a bad player and you let a superstar go somewhere else. So the only rule is don't screw it up.
100%. And if I was an NFL GM, I would just simply draft all the best players. If I was an NFL coach, my team would win all the games.
Teams are really missing that aspect of things. It's not that hard. Just draft good players.
Draft good players.
Or what you do is you turn one player into multiple picks.
Yeah.
And the Niners kind of tried to do that, and they moved down one spot with the Bucks when they made the right before they made the Kinlaw pick. But like if you could turn one player, and that was my thing with Debo, is like, okay, if you're going to trade him to the Jets, then move down from 10 and get another first round pick and move down here. Now you're building your roster for the future with a whole bunch of picks. You're not just trading one player for one player. And so if you can do that, and it's difficult and you have to have the offers for it, but if you can pull that off, then it starts to make things it makes a lot more sense to me because you have a lot less margin for error and you're actually building something on your team. And maybe you hit on one of those players who replaces your guy, then you have depth elsewhere as well.
I'll tell you this, when the Jets thing was floated out there, and I didn't like saying this online because people were just being absolutely toxic about it, and one, I didn't believe that the Jets were ever going to move that pick for Deebo Samuel, but I would have said right away, like I would have ran the card up there for Garrett Wilson, would have just ran it up like for Garrett Wilson.
I had this conversation with Croc too, because we were in this same mode talking about the same thing, and Croc's like, if the Niners trade away Deebo Samuel, I don't want them to do what they did with DeForest Buckner and spin the pick on the same position. And I was like, I agree with you in theory, but I would still take Garrett Wilson because I love Garrett Wilson, and he ended up going 10 to the Jets, and he's a really good player. But in hindsight with that deal, now that the Brandon Aiyuk thing's happening, that even because the deal would have been now if they took Garrett Wilson, the deal would have been Deebo Samuel, and you don't have to pay him. The Jets pay him instead, and Drake Jackson for Garrett Wilson. And the way the 49ers team's built right now, in hindsight, that would have been a good deal for the 49ers, even though at the time I would have said, nope, not enough, Jets. Sorry, we're not giving you the second round pick too. But the second rounder didn't work out, or hasn't worked out so far in Drake Jackson. Big year for him. On the clock, by the way, probably is Drake Jackson in 2024. Hindsight, I'm probably taking that deal right now.
Yeah, I don't want to get upset, but perfect segue into what we're all here for. We've got about 13, 15 more minutes. We like to keep these things at an hour. Again, guys, like this video, subscribe to both channels, guys. We appreciate you all being here. Over 200 people in here. Let's talk about it. Going into minicamp's over, right? Minicamp's over. We're going to get this dead period now, where we're just going to get to yell at each other about Brandon Aiyuk and what's going to happen with Brock Purdy and where does Brock Purdy land on the top 10 quarterback. Can't wait for this time in non-football to just be yelling about these things.
List season. How many lists do you have on tap at Niners Nation? You got any good? Cooking up any good lists?
I 100% avoid it, Brian. I've been writing nothing but film articles just to say, hey, listen, this is in-depth stuff. I don't keep me out of the film. Keep me out of the list stuff. I'm sticking to the film stuff because I've been busting my ass trying to learn as much film as possible.
Doing the Lord's work.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it doesn't get the views, but honestly, I don't want people yelling at me about the list. You're an idiot. This guy's up high. Nope, don't want to hear it. Don't care. I don't want to argue with anybody. I'm protecting my peace with not doing those lists. But and you know what's funny? I'm probably going to turn this into an article on Niners Nation listing these players that are on the clock. Who is on the clock heading into training camp and needs to have a very good training camp preseason to make the 53-man roster, just bluntly?
I think the clock is ticking very, very, very far down already for Ambry Thomas. I think it's the easiest one, but they brought in 1 million corners. They even drafted a guy in the second round. They haven't taken a corner that high in the whole regime of this football team. Multiple outside corners in free agency that were veterans. And I just don't think the 49ers want Ambry Thomas on the team. So this one's kind of cheating because I think he's more off the roster than he's on it at this point. But the clock is absolutely taken for Ambry Thomas.
I would believe so too. And for what it's worth, the 49ers did a very good job when they made that switch in Jacksonville early on, shading guys his way, putting him in good spots, not having him on an island. But the problem is everyone sees him there. And when Mooney Ward and Lenore are performing as well, it's less that, oh, that guy's really bad, is I don't want to try those other guys, and he's out there, right? And if he's out there, then it becomes something of like a little bit of a pick on. And I think Ambry has a little bit of like spiraling, like when things don't start going well for him, like it starts to get into his head. That's a little bit of it too. But a third round pick, you definitely need them to contribute, and that's what they put in. I'm gonna say Danny Gray. Look, I don't know what Danny Gray is because I haven't seen him, and that's part of the issue. There's a multitude of reasons of why players don't work out. Sometimes it's injury, sometimes it's head, sometimes it's the way that you haven't been able to transition. But when you look at them drafting 2 receivers who 100% are going to make this 53-man roster, right? Then you've got 3 other guys. That's 5. I would bet money, unless Chris Conley just does not play well at all, that he's number 6. Where does Danny Gray fit on this roster in terms of the wide receivers? Because it's hard to envision him getting any time if he's on there. And then you have to make a tough decision with another group. Danny Gray, man, I've heard good things, but that's in shorts. And one more thing I want to say, I think the Danny Gray pick was in tandem with the idea that Trey Lance was going to be the quarterback who would push the ball a little bit further down the field at times. And when that goes out of the way, and then now you have the injuries, he never sees the field, and now you have who's in front of him, that seems like an easy one too.
Absolutely. Danny Gray's for sure on the clock. He has to show that he's valuable enough for a roster spot that they're willing to cut somebody else. They're willing to pass the veteran Chris Conley through waivers. He has to be able to play special teams. Conley can. Ronnie Bell can. Danny Gray hasn't really to this point. He's not a returner. He's not built like a coverage guy, really. And so it's going to be a tough drafting 2 players, 2 rookies. If those guys stay healthy, that's really tough for Danny Gray to make the roster at this point, even if he improves a lot from what we've seen. And we haven't really seen a lot. I mentioned Drake Jackson already, so I'm not going to say him, but he's for sure one of those guys to me. Ambry Thomas was the easy one. That was the low-hanging fruit. I'm going to go to players who aren't on the clock because they're going to be bad. I am just looking at the 49ers salary structure, and we've talked a lot about that today and how things might go. And I look at the 49ers draft class, and I see Ricky Pearsall, and I see Renardo Green, and I see Dominic Pooney, and I see Malik Mustafa. And what my brain does is I look 1 year down the road, and I see Deebo Samuel, and I see Charvarius Ward, and I see Aaron Banks, and I see Talanoa Hufanga. All really good players, but all players that I don't know if the 49ers can afford to keep paying if they're paying all these other players tons of money. And unless you are a true difference-making player, the 49ers at this point cannot afford to pay you in free agency. And so they could lose all of those guys, and it's going to be on those rookie players to show up and develop in year 1 so they're ready to have potential starting roles in year 2.
Yeah, I think that's a really good one too. And obviously I believe Jacob Cowan is going to make this roster as well too, right? Like, and then, you have the other guys. I think Beal makes this roster as a rotational guy. They have a pretty good rotation right on the defensive line. There's probably going to be 1 or 2 of these defensive line guys that are going to have to, they're going to have to make a move off of, right? Like there's going to be good football players cut from this team because this is how good this football team is in terms of like, it's less about, oh, he's a bad player or it's a numbers game. And if you throw some of these guys on a practice squad, they're absolutely going to get poached, right? I think somebody that we're kind of like looking at right now is obviously, and I hate to say this because he was redshirted the entire season, Cam Latu. Now, look, obviously we know about the drops. And then Kyle Shanahan comes out when he's asked, is Latu the number 2? And he flat out, no. He's got to get on the field. Like flat out, no.
He didn't even try to give a PR sort of an answer, coach speak, nothing. Like you could tell, like that was like, oh no, he's deep in the doghouse right now, and I don't think Kyle cares if he comes out of the doghouse. It's almost one of those where like Kyle was probably fighting with John Lynch, and there was like, oh, Kyle's like, oh, I like this guy, and John Lynch is like, well, we gave you your guy the last round. We're like this guy, we're gonna go this guy, and Kyle's like, I didn't really like that pick, and then and then whatever happened his rookie year, and he's like, "Yep, I was right. That's not my guy." I get that vibe. Like, and look, that was a quick answer from Kyle Shanahan, and sometimes he's too honest. But Cam Latu at this point, I mean, Logan Thomas, he was outplayed as a rookie by Braden Willis, a fellow rookie. You brought in Eric Saubert, who's like the only other Y tight end, and you got George Kittle. There's not even a space for Cam Latu right now.
And you signed Brock Wright to an offer sheet. Like, right. The 49ers are telling you exactly how they feel about it. It's not us.
It's the Ambry Thomas thing, right? Where it's like they're trying so hard to replace you, they're not even hiding it.
Right, like if you and your girlfriend go on a break and you start dating 4 and 5 girls, and then you're just like, oh, none of those worked out. I'm back, honey. Yeah, like, no, that's not how it works. Like, you're telling your significant other what it is, and that's the thing. And it's hard to look at that pick as one that's a little bit of a head scratcher, because even on draft day, I was like, man, that's too high. That is really too high right there. And again, it's in that cursed 3rd round. But again, I hate to say it, in a second year where a guy who hadn't played at all, essentially, right, played a little in camp, and it sounds like he'll be ready for camp. It sounds like you've really got to do something, because Braden Willis definitely does have that. And by the way, we talked about guys who impressed. He impressed today apparently as well too. So he's even getting good buzz. Everything's going stock up now for him. And he played snaps last season, especially down the stretch and in playoff games. Might have been 9 or 10 snaps, but he played. It's just hard to see Latu making his team unless he just turns into some, a phenomenal player.
Another corner is, and I think I saw this one in the chat as well, is Sam Womack.
Yeah.
Who is another player like Jalen Graham. I think would be kind of he was the darling last season. I don't mean to take two, but like, players that showed up very early and you're like, oh, this is going to be a guy. I guess Ronnie Bell's kind of in that category too, where it's like, oh, they show up early. Oh, this is a guy. And then immediately disappear. And it's like, well, hey, what happened to that one guy? And Sam Womack now is like, what happened? This guy was looking like he was legit going to be a starting nickel for a long time. And now he's not even in the rotation on the outside. He's barely around, had a little injury, got nicked up, which is always kind of part of the problem with all these guys that end up being busts. They seem to disappear for a while with an injury, whether it's real or they're just getting stashed or something. But Sam Womack is another one where he's going to be in a fight for a roster spot, just like Ambry Thomas is, because there's a lot of bodies at cornerback right now.
Yeah, and I think we just pegged Womack right away as a slot guy, but he's in this purgatory of can't really play slot, definitely can't play outside, in my opinion, right? It's just like, what can you do, right? Like, I think the game where it really stood out to me was that cursed Atlanta game where we lost to Marcus Mariota, and all the 49ers corners all got hurt. And it got to a point where Samuel Womack had to play outside because of the bodies that were there. And here's Kyle Pitts, who hasn't scored a touchdown on American soil, and he's on the outside, and he scores a touchdown, and he's just having trouble keeping up with all the receivers. He's in this spot where he's not strong enough, or I guess quick enough to be on the inside, and he's not fast enough to be on the outside, and he just becomes a special teams type of guy. Unless there, that dog in him grows a little bit, and he just lifts himself a little bit. But then you look around, like you said, Renardo Green's probably going to be here. So's Malik, Yidiam and Rock Yassin. You know how Kyle loves his veterans. I think one, if not two of those guys stick around. Obviously, Lenore and Mooney. It's hard to figure out where he fits on this team. And can you just hold a 53-man roster spot for a guy who primarily is going to be a special teamer?
Yeah, he's just kind of a tweener. He's built like a nickel guy, but he plays more like an outside guy, but doesn't have length on the outside. Can he find a home, and can he prove that he's ready to ball and he's trusted to be out there is a big key. And he'd probably have to beat out someone like Rock Yassin for a roster spot, because I think Yidim sounds like he's kind of locked into a roster spot the way he's played in camp so far. So and Rock Yassin's had a little injury as well in OTH. Yeah. So little opportunity there. I would say probably more likely Womack comes back than Ambry Thomas, even though Ambry Thomas was kind of ahead of Womack to start last year on the depth chart. I don't feel like it's necessarily that way this year.
Yeah. Anyone else? All right. Here's one. Who's someone that I think everybody believes is a lock that could be like a surprise move if someone else steps up? And I have a name, and I think we might be going in the same direction with this name.
Okay, let's say the name on three. Ready?
Yo, go.
1, 2, 3. Brock Purdy.
You diabolical feed. You almost set me
the
up.
Mordecai era. Let's go.
Hey, the 49ers have done a great job of just finding those guys in the later round as opposed to paying those guys early on. All right.
No, who's yours?
I think Jordan Mason or Elijah Mitchell are in trouble of not making this roster if they could find something from Schrader, or if they really like Garendo.
Yeah, I want to see if Garendo can be an asset in the return game with the new return rules. I don't really know what to expect with the new return game and what style of player is going to play there. I don't expect Garendo to be a bell cow back in the NFL, or but he's got some receiving skills, and so he's a player that, as long as he can play special teams, will make a roster as a rookie, and then be sort of a third down style of a back who's a bigger back who should be able to pass protect and play third down role, especially if someone like McCaffrey goes down and you need all hands on deck to replace that production. And if you can play special teams, all the more power to him. I think Cody Schrader is clearly a more instinctive runner. And if you're just looking for a guy to carry the rock, I think he might beat out Garendo as a rookie. But I think they'll be able to stash Schrader on the practice squad as long as there's not a bunch of injuries in camp with other teams at running back, because the guy went undrafted, right? And Mason Pline's kind of the same with the numbers game at tight end. So I do expect those rookies probably to be able to make the practice squad. And you still have 4 other running backs, and you probably keep 4 plus you Juice as the 5th as a fullback. So I think they can all make the team. But if someone like Cody Schrader just looks amazing, and they're like, man, we don't even want to put this guy on waivers, maybe they can get a 6th round pick for Elijah Mitchell or Jordan Mason or something like that. And kind of like the Jeff Wilson trade to Miami last year. I could see that happen with Elijah Mitchell or Jordan Mason.
Schrader is going to be the Mason of this camp. Right? Like when we were at that camp and he's just like, man, who's 24? Like, man, oh my God. And he's just like ripping off these runs. There's always that one guy that you're looking at. And I just want to know, whoever is the odd man out in this backfield, you will always have a home on the Philadelphia Eagle practice squad right after. Like, you will always have a home. And funny enough that we're talking about that, they said the clear number 2 in Indianapolis Colts camp. Here's a name that you probably haven't heard in a while. Trey Sermon, right behind Jonathan Taylor.
Oh,
yeah. So
Taylor, Trey Sermon, wow.
You can go to the Philadelphia Eagles for a little while and then just end up somewhere else. You know, I think Tyrese Price is still somewhere piddling around on that Philadelphia roster. But I think that Schrader is the guy that we're all going to start looking at, like Mason, where we all started like banging the table for Mason. Like, man, this guy looks really good. I think that's one of those gems that they find, because remember, cover your ears, guys. They drafted Trey Sermon, and then they took Elijah Mitchell on the back end, and then Mitchell just clearly outplayed him. And it's always like that guy that's either at the end of the draft, undrafted free agent, that you've always got to look at and always look out for. If he starts to do that stuff that Kyle likes, man, now it becomes really tough to hang on to all these guys.
I'm trying to rack my brain for someone who'd be a little bit more shocking that doesn't even make
a running back
53-man roster this year.
I thought that was show stopping by saying that a running back's not going to make this roster.
That's a good one, because I just, are they all going to be healthy? I just feel like it's easier to stash a running back, and either any of those guys are one play away from them needing to hand them the ball 20 times. And so it's hard for me to envision one of the running backs goes, but I could absolutely see a late camp trade if they like both the rookies at that position. I think quarterback, I think everyone's like, oh, Josh Dobbs, they found a backup quarterback. I don't think that's a guarantee necessarily. I think the team likes Brandon Allen enough. Maybe Mordecai's another player where, like Purdy, where they're like, oh man, Mordecai might have the best arm on the roster, but actually,
Nate Sudfeld.
You know who has the best arm on the roster? Logan Thomas.
I knew it. I knew
it. Cannon of an arm. He's not a good quarterback. That's why he's playing tight end now, but he's got a cannon arm.
Kyle's playing 4D chess. He's just like, hey, if all my quarterbacks go down, I still have Logan Thomas. Like,
I can't wait for that tight end throwback play.
Oh my God.
Gotta run.
But you got to remember, right? Like we were all following the money a little bit with Nate Sudfeld during that camp. We're just like, hey, you don't give him that money, and like, that's backup money. Like, he's got it. And then Brock Purdy starts to impress in the preseason, and they're just like, well, you're out of here, man. Yeah. And by the way, we're keeping Jimmy. Like, so things kind of change pretty quickly. That's not a bad one. I don't think that they get rid of Brandon Allen, because I think he just loves the fact that he understands the system, right? Over there with Zach Taylor, another variation of Kyle Shanahan stuff. I don't know if Brandon Allen's good, but Chase Daniels stuck around the league a lot of years to just be around. Maybe Brandon Allen's the next guy.
I got one more. How safe is Spencer Burford?
See, now Forrester is going out of his way to praise him, right? Like he looks very fast and all of those things. So I don't know if that tells you anything, but what I do notice is that when the team is souring, the position coaches leave things out. And I have a few examples, right? So I remember when Anthony Lynn took over and he's going over everything that the 49ers need with Christian McCaffrey, right? We need guys who can catch passes. He mentions every single running back on the roster except for Ty Davis Price. What happens? Ty Davis Price is gone. Now, they're talking about Burford a little bit, right? Like right now. And then there's like we're talking about with Cam Latu, right? No, he's not the tight end too, like right now. Like when you start to hear those things, that's when I start to think there's like a top down like feeling in the building, but they're going out of their way to praise Burford. I wonder if with the Brendel injury, John Feliciano steps into center, and then there's a way that maybe he doesn't stick around, and they feel good about Pooney, and they feel good about the chances with Pooney and Burford. The offensive line could get a little tricky here, and that could be one of your surprise cuts right there. Oh, you're on mute. Yeah.
I'm looking at, so Trent Williams not at practice, so it's Jalen Moore and who's the other veteran free agent? Brandon Parker, the 49ers.
Brandon Parker.
So they're getting the reps of tackles. So there's your 4 top tackles right there with Colton McKivitz and Trent Williams, the starters, right? If they all make the team, that leaves you with how many do you break camp with? 6 or 10 total offensive linemen. If 6 more, maybe 9 offensive linemen make the team. And you know that Feliciano is going to be there, and he might start at right guard if you got Brendel at center if he's healthy, and you got Aaron Banks, and then you got the rookie and Pooney, and so that leaves you 1 or 2 more spots, maybe, or maybe no spots. Like maybe that's kind of it. Zakelj, I think finally his run is going to be over. He hasn't shown me anything. Ben Barch was the next guy up after both Brendel and Feliciano were out at minicamp. So Ben Barch was the next guy up. He can play guard, he can play center, has that versatility. And so we haven't even mentioned Burford yet. So somebody from that group is probably not going to make the team. You have Kingston, the rookie, who I actually like. I think he's the perfect guy to kind of be the last man on your roster. I certainly would keep him over Zakelj. Maybe you put him on the practice squad and you're able to hide him there. But and I feel like I'm missing somebody too. But there's going to be a numbers game, and on game day you only dress 7 guys, so you have to have 1 guy who's backing up guard and center, and Pooney is probably going to be one of those backups on game day. And if Burford's not starting, can he play center or can he play tackle? And if he can't, and if we don't see him start and we don't see him practicing other positions in camp, I think he is a dark horse to be gone.
So Nick Wagner, who I think does a phenomenal job covering the 49ers for ESPN, he wrote an article about the offensive line philosophy and how he understands that everyone from the outside wanted them to address it. There was a lot of offensive linemen here, and he talks about the 49ers just loading up on their playmakers and everything. But I did find this one stat to be very, very, very interesting. So obviously Pooney and Kingston, all short shuttle kings, right? They have high numbers in speed. Since 2010, 28 offensive linemen ran a 4.47 or better in the short shuttle at the combine, with 24 of those players being drafted. Those 24 went on to play 84% of their NFL games. That's not a coincidence, and that is a very high number. That's something that's kind of interesting.
And one of the guys who ran that time but wasn't drafted?
Who's that?
Jake Brendel.
That's crazy. Yeah. So they do value it. Yeah. They do value it, right? Like they do value that part, right? Like everyone wants, pass pro, but with the amount of pulling, with the amount of deception and speed to the outside on outside zones, they do value that. But Kingston and Pooney fit that mold as well too. So if Kingston impresses, now what? Like you're really putting this offensive line in a position where it could be a lot more interesting than I think people just lining it up as them running it back. It might not be.
Here's my take with Burford too in the offensive line. If Burford's not impressing you, and you already know that you like Feliciano better, and you like Barch, and you like the rookie and Pooney, let Burford play his college position at tackle. Let him battle with Colton McKivitz, because Colton McKivitz failed at guard early in his career and was actually cut from the team, then came back and then made good at tackle. And Spencer Burford's more physically gifted than Colton McKivitz is. So I wouldn't mind seeing Spencer Burford getting some reps at right tackle. And then that's your path to making the team. Now you're a backup at tackle, swing tackle, and guard. And then now you're more valuable to the team if you're not a starter.
And Nugent's been getting great reviews, which I don't know how you really get great reviews right now at minicamp when, you're not really hitting.
Yeah, offensive line's probably the hardest. The thing I take away is just what order are they putting guys in? You kind of get an idea of what the depth chart is, but like it's you got to see the pads come on for those guys in the trenches. But they do have some depth, and they have a lot of interior guys, and they didn't really do anything in tackle in the offseason. They brought in Brandon Parker.
And we forgot about Hubbard.
Oh, they brought in Hubbard a couple weeks ago, right? Right after the draft. Yeah.
Right. So like
right before the draft. Right after the
draft.
Right.
Like, so again, they've drafted guys, they've got their cast of veterans, they've got the guys that they already kind of know what they've got. And this is going to get really interesting, especially when we get to camp and the pads go on.
Do you remember Aaron Banks' rookie year? This is the importance of versatility if you're a backup offensive lineman. Burford was a guard in college and played guard in the NFL. He didn't win the right guard job. He didn't suit up all season long. And it's because he couldn't play two positions. So the guys that are going to make the roster and the guys that are going to have uniforms on game day, if you're not a starter, you've got to be able to play multiple positions on the offensive line. And guys that aren't playing multiple positions and not starting, my guy Jason Poe, I don't know where he went. He went to another team now. But that was my guy. And I was like, why is he not playing other positions? He's only playing one spot, and he's not starting there. So guess what? He's on the practice squad, never gets a shot.
And funny enough, Burford started right away, right? Like he went into camp and he started right away, right at guard. And if we're gonna do my guys, I could have swore Tariq Castro Fields was gonna be a contributor for this 49ers, but he just ended up being a Washington Commander.
He's a Commander. Yeah, I was just saying, is he an Eagle too? But he went to the same division, but he's a Commander. Okay.
Yep, 100%. Hey guys. Thank you guys for joining. Hour 10 minutes, 255 people in here. Make sure you guys like this video, subscribe to both channels. Thank you guys for taking time out of your day today. I'm glad we did this Wednesday, because if we were to try to do this on NBA Finals game day, I don't know, man. I don't know if that's why you're saying Jaylen Brown. You're hyped up for the finals.
I'm not. I couldn't care less about basketball right now. All I'm thinking about is jumping in the pool because I'm dying. Heat wave. Enough of this heat wave, man. I'm a California kid. I live on the coast. I need that cool breeze.
Hey, but before we go, tell them everything that you've got going on. Obviously, Locked On and all that stuff, but all the shows that you have going on.
Yeah, Locked On 49ers with my guy Eric Crocker, daily covering your San Francisco 49ers on the Locked On Podcast Network. I also have the Peacock and Williamson NFL show covering the entire league at Locked On. Matt Williamson, my co-host there, former NFL scout, ESPN scribe, also covers the Steelers in Pittsburgh now. And then OT with BP, my extra YouTube channel, where this is right now live streaming Overtime with Brian Peacock, just for extra stuff like this that I don't have time to do throughout the week on the other pods, like chat with my guy, Jason Aponte. Make sure you subscribe there at BD Peacock on Twitter. And I think that's everywhere. The other places you don't want to find me.
Yeah, awesome. So, yeah, guys, look out for Niners Nation. Obviously, I write there all the time. And Sprint Right Options on its way back. Bully Ball, Gold Standard Podcast Network. You know that we do a lot of good work over there as well, too. But we're getting close. Obviously, it's about to be a little bit of a dead time. But thank you guys for joining and joining the conversation as well, too. Have a great rest of your night. And as always, go Niners. Welcome, everybody. Let's go Niners. My name is Jason Aponte.